Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for coming to the Troped conference. This panel is on burning privacy tech buyer pain points, opportunities, and trends, and I have some notes on my phone. I promise you I'm not on TikTok, at least not right now. So I'll let us all start with our own intros, starting with Sheila, and then Stuart, and then I'll go myself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sheila Jambekar. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Plaid. We're in the fintech space. Before I was at Plaid, I've been there for a couple of years. Before that, I spent many years building the privacy program at Twilio, the communications software as a service platform. So excited to talk about out there who are build the thing that we're looking for.
Awesome. So hi, everybody. Good morning. Stuart Lee. I'm the VP and Chief Privacy Officer over at VMware. For those of you that may have not heard of us, we worked originally in the virtualization space and still do, now very much supporting our customers on their multi-cloud journey. I've been at VMware for about 5 years. Before that was part of Deloitte's privacy program in Chicago, and then in the UK, traveled the world as part of that GDPR thing that we all know and love, helping to deploy programs across the globe. But I actually got my start in privacy as an academic, working in the field of criminology, where I was actually requesting data from the government and kind of concerned how easy sometimes it was to get the data. And that really was where my passion began. So excited today to talk about this space. It's obviously one that we work a lot with Law Des about, and interested to hear what you all have to say about what we think as well. So thank you.
And good morning again. I'm Fatima Khan. I'm the Director of Corporate Counsel of Privacy and Product at Okta. Okta is a cybersecurity and identity management company that seeks to connect the right people to the right technology at the right time. I've been in privacy since the beginning of my career, working primarily in the tech industry. Prior to Okta, I was a chief privacy officer at a company called Demandbase and spent about 7.5 years in ad tech working on making sure that they did not get under the regulator's skin in that industry. So I'm going to kick off into our main discussion and really talk about, start with the pain points, right? That's what everybody wants to know. You see with privacy tech on the rise, and then with Stuart's quote about how you can't just throw bodies at privacy problems, we've really been seeing a lot of privacy tech come up in the rise and really the digital transformation of the privacy office. So to start with that question is, where do vendors come in when building a privacy program? Sheila, Stuart, do either of you want to take that first?
I'll take that one first. The problem of the bodies, right? The problem is that it takes bodies to implement technology, and that's often a pain point. Very often, their data is uniquely within their ecosystem. It's all in different places, different object models, whatnot. And it's very difficult to come up with like a one-size-fits-all for how to implement a tool that will sort of solve the problem. And so one of the pain points is that many of us in privacy offices don't have a ton of bodies even to do the implementation. So you think, gee, if only I could get this tool, it would really solve a bunch of problems. However, I need body, and it would avoid me having to hire a bunch of people because I can't get the headcount. But the tricky part is actually getting the headcount to then implement it and get it working right. And that's a pain point that I've run into a few different places is, do you have the right skill sets internal that you have at your disposal in the privacy office in order to successfully implement a tech tool, even though you see this wonderful tech? So that's one of the pain points, is that implementation aspect and getting it actually working. Because once it's actually working, it can be great, but like it can take some time because every company is unique.
I think the implementation part is such a pain point because traditionally privacy professionals weren't expected to implement tools and technologies. And now that has completely shifted. We're now seeing the growth of the privacy engineer, the privacy operations professional, folks who've been trained to do these kind of things, but it's still not that common in organizations. So as a result, you're relying on your IT teams or your security teams or others to help you, but they don't necessarily speak privacy. And so they say, well, hold on, you want to do data discovery, we've already got a tool that does that. You want to do data classification, we've already got a tool that does that. For those of us that had to implement any of these tools 5, 6, 7 years ago, they weren't quite good enough then. They didn't quite hit the mark. Similarly, when we talk about privacy by design, I know a lot of us talk about privacy by design in our day-to-day roles. That's a very new concept for a lot of folks, especially if they're in the cyberspace, because they say, well, we already got the confidentiality piece covered. We haven't thought about the usage part. And this is where AI comes in, and I'm going to stop myself from ranting on that one quite yet, but I'll get there, I promise. The other part is the interoperability. When we started implementing privacy tools, we thought we had a solution, but we didn't realize there's a bunch of other problems that we couldn't necessarily solve for. So how do you get that privacy tech stack to actually come back together and work together? How do you get your, what I call the POTS tools, the privacy operations tools, to talk to your privacy engineering tools? How do you get those to talk to your legal tech tools? How do you get those to talk to your data classification and governance tools that's owned by your data science team? They haven't always come back together, and that's still a major pain point, because if you're going to create new problems inside your organization, your IT team's going to throw its arms up in the air and say, we don't want to get involved anymore. So yes, the people part, the experience part, the internal education part, the interoperability part, and how we make these things really come back together, those are some of the biggest pain points that we're facing right now in this very, very new field.
I was going to add on to that one. The other common thing, which is sort of related to what you're describing, Stuart, is you think, oh, this is a great tool. They come in and they say, okay, so what are your data schemas? And then your data scientists go, schemas?
Mm-hmm.
What? Or they're not using consistency. So understanding and being upfront about what are the sort of baseline things that have levels of maturity that the organization itself has to be at in order for the privacy tech tool to work, because it sounds like a great idea, it seems like it works, but if you've got 2 years of data science team work that needs to happen before you can put your privacy tech tool in place and have it work, that becomes, well, shoot, I just spent a bunch of money and I can't really make use of it, not because the privacy team isn't ready for it, but because the organization doesn't have the level of maturity in its own handling of data or data governance to set the foundation to layer a privacy tool on top of it. So some of those foundational things, like really understanding what those are up front when you're having those conversations with privacy tech companies, is really important, because I have run into the, oh shoot, we just bought something that we can't use because the rest of the organization isn't ready for it. And so I think that's an important aspect of solving that problem, or at least understanding what is the sort of necessary foundation, and not assuming that that foundation actually exists in every company.
Yeah, similarly, I would add on and agree with everything all of you said, and say, whenever I look at a privacy tech tool, one big challenge I've had is making sure that we do have the buy-in of all of those cross-functional stakeholders to be able to implement it. That resourcing for implementation doesn't usually sit in my team. It sits in our business technology team. It sits in our privacy engineering team. It sits in project management or legal ops. So to be able to implement anything, I need to months, a year, in advance, try to get that resourcing and wrangle them to then implement it, and then maybe the maintenance will sit in my team and with an operational person, or maybe it'll sit outside of my team and then in my team. So it really depends on the tool and the functionality it offers. What vendors could really help is giving benchmarking data to all of us of how different teams have implemented it, who's been involved, the typical implementation lifecycle. All of that information is going to be really helpful to your buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think building on to those respective points, knowing your data, obviously it's such a huge critical thing. For many of us in the privacy space, we ended up becoming de facto CDTOs as part of GDPR and as part of CCPA and CPRA, and insert favorite 4-letter acronym here. We've been working in this space trying to understand our data in our organizations for quite some time now. And it's not just the structured data sets, it's often the unstructured which causes some of the biggest pain points as we're thinking about those toolings that's helping us there.
Yeah, certainly so. So switching gears a little bit, a privacy tech vendor recently said to me is, hey, I'm selling into the security team rather than the privacy team. As privacy heads in your respective organizations, where do you come in the buying process? Like, how do you get budget? Why would a privacy tech vendor want to sell to you as opposed to a security professional or a business technology analytics person?
I think it's a great question. Honestly, for me, it depends on who owns the problem and the solution. So if I think very much about the role of the chief privacy officer, yes, we care about all things privacy, but there are aspects of what we do that are owned by other teams. And so if, for example, and I'm going to use marketing because it's the most clean one, why am I setting the strategy for cookie usage at the company beyond what the requirements are? That is something that the digital marketing team should be running with. They should be buying the tool. They should own the cost of implementation and the effort. My team providing that guidance on how best to execute and operationalize from a privacy compliance point of view. Similarly for security and for other data-related matters. The part where it gets tricky is when multiple people own the same part of the problem pie, such as the data discovery issue. And so I think this is where we start seeing some of that budget and some of that ownership move more centrally and becoming part of a steering committee to help guide the conversation rather than being the principal buyer. My biggest challenge and concern always is, both when I was in the consulting space and not so, is making sure you actually have a seat at the table for deciding which tool. Because you don't want to get left with something that you can't use because you don't have the resourcing, you don't have the support to do so, you don't have the professional services to continue moving it. You end up in a very difficult buy v build conversation, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit as well, and making sure you have a seat at that table if it's a co-join problem versus it's one that's really a business-owned problem and solution. But Sheila, your views.
I think the rise of the chief privacy officer itself and what is the function of that role, I think historically it's been more akin to legal teams consulting, writing policies, and it's shifting more towards looking more like a CISO-esque kind of role where it is not just a bunch of lawyers or a bunch of one group of skill sets, but a broader variety of skill sets. So I think it is admittedly tricky right now to know exactly who to go and talk to, but I think Stuart's point is right. It's like trying to understand a bit about the nature of who's accountable for solving whatever the problem is. And sometimes it is the chief privacy officer. Sometimes you feel like what you are doing is you're the influencer. Maybe you have some money. You're like, I can make the budget, but you need to bring the head count, CISO, or IT. You're going to bring me the head count, but I'm going to bring you the budget. Or hey, we need a thing. And then sometimes I'll go out and do the research on what the thing, here are 5 options you might want to consider. Hint, hint, try this one, in order to encourage the team, but to convincing them that they need to buy something, convincing them that they need to do the thing and helping them figure out which is the right. So you kind of have to probably figure out, like, is your chief privacy officer an influencer or actually own a budget? And that is not, unfortunately, as consistent as it probably is in other spaces like in security, where there's a longer history and maturity level of the industry in terms of understanding them as needing to own their own resources and budget.
Yeah, 100%. Similarly to what you described, Sheila, in my organization, either I have budget for a tool, and that is a specific type of tool, like a DSR tool, and an operational person handles it in my team, or I'm coming in very strategically for something that's a broader data tool that our business technology, our engineering, various teams would use, and have a seat at the table and saying, hey, we really need to address this gap. And I might be working with IA to get that budget or headcount for resourcing to implement that tool, but it's something that I'm very involved in if that budget does not sit with me. So very similar scenarios to what both of y'all described.
And I don't think it's unusual, even some of the same problems that CISOs face, or some of the similar ones that you face in privacy, which is you're trying to solve something and you want to own it because you feel accountable for it. So you want the budget and you want the head count. The problem is it's not as if it all like sort of sits in one little spot in the corner. Privacy doesn't exist in like, oh, here it is. Here I can draw the circle around privacy at my company and we'll take care of it for you, right? I always tell people, I can't take care of privacy for you. I can help you. I can guide you. But that's true on the technology side as well, that the data is going throughout the stack, all over the place in the stack. And so it's touching the marketing team, the HR team. It's certainly many companies touching your product teams. And so putting privacy tools in can't sort of sit in a silo as easily, such that you could say, oh, well, I got that covered. So you really need to have that buy-in, even if you are paying for it.
And to add is, not every organization has approached privacy in the same way. So not everybody has a chief privacy officer. Not everybody has, well, everybody now generally has a chief security officer, but who do they go to for privacy questions? Sometimes that has now fallen on a CISO. And so I completely agree. There's an aspect of this where there is the cross-functional accountability for all matters as it comes to compliance, in particular privacy. While a tool can be paid for by one team, there generally is a community that makes the implementation and operationalization successful for the use of that tool.
Yeah, so I think from that standpoint, if the tool can be multiply useful, there's sort of your IT team, your implementation team is saying, can you make this as easy and painless as possible, right? Least amount of work on my team, which means fewer sprints. I can focus on what is my primary area of accountability. If you can then say, hey, this is actually useful for a security team and the privacy team. Oh, hey, this actually could be useful for your data scientist team and your privacy team. Finding those ways that you can pitch the product in a way that it solves multiple teams' problems or could be helpful for multiple teams can speak to some of that community of who you're trying to convince. Make it as easy as possible, but also solve 5 different problems at the same time. Can you figure that one out, guys? But there are definitely different stakeholders. Like we have a tool now that it was co-bought between privacy and security. We're looking at another potential solution where my data science team was saying, oh my God, we would love that too. And so we're finding our bedfellows, so to speak, to help us solve problems together, because a lot of these problems overlap.
Yeah, I mean, very spot on. Privacy is really a strategic organization within a company rather than an empire that has all of the resourcing, all of the headcount. Privacy is everybody's obligation at a company, so it makes sense for that responsibility and ownership to be distributed of a lot of the tooling. So into my next topic, and Stuart, you mentioned this previously, where would you build in-house versus buy?
Do you want to start or should I?
Oh my gosh, go ahead. This one's tricky. You can start.
Yeah, so as a software company, we have a lot of people that like to build stuff. And so typically when you walk into a room saying, this is what I need, there is somebody there that is able to build it. The challenge then becomes if and when they leave, you're then left with an architecture and a system that you may not have somebody behind you that understands what decisions were made, what the limitations were, etc. So I would say you buy the stuff that you know that if you built it and somebody left, you're going to be kind of lost for words. The workflow tools, etc., a lot of us have those already. Those you can build on top of. Those are the things that can make an easier decision for you. Where you have a lot of homegrown systems, you may choose to build the solutions for working with those, because buying may not get you there because of the internal implementation. But I think it has to be a detailed conversation that you have with your IT team early, coming up with those functional, non-functional requirements. Where is it that you're really looking to get 5, 10, 15 years from now? What are the issues around scalability and interoperability? Is that even a word? Did I just make that up? We'll stick with it.
We all understood it.
Well understood it. But those are the ones where we can really then focus the time on saying this is where we can best build versus buy.
Yeah, I think that a similar issue working in a software company, the engineers are like, let's build it. And you're like, well, that sounds really fun, but like in 5 years from now, when this is not our core, if this is not our core area, are we really going to want to maintain it? And so, the same reason why people may come and buy our software is the same reason we may want to buy software, because you're looking for somebody who is going to maintain this. This is what their area is. So there's also like convincing. There's a degree to which you have to spend time convincing folks, like, do we really want to invest the time? Do we have the time? It may be faster, while it does take time to implement, faster to get up and running with a tool. Secondly, while that sounds really cool to build the thing, there is stuff out there, and is this really what the company is here for? When it's really core to what you're doing, sometimes, that's where you say, okay, we're going to build this because it is core functionality and it is core to the company. You can imagine that there will be people here in 5 to 10 years still trying to iterate, improve. But, things like, there's a reason why people buy cookie banners and don't build their own. Well, because there's tools out there that do it really well, and it's usually not a core functionality of the business is making sure that your cookie banner is working really well. But that gets trickier as you get closer and closer to the sort of core data of the company, and that's where more of the engineers get much more like, no, I want to hold on to that. So that is a gentle conversation sometimes. We're like, no, what about this tool? Do we really have to? And sometimes you have to go over those people's heads and say, like, maybe we should buy instead of build this, because the folks who are builders, they're builders for a reason. They love it. So it can be a tricky conversation.
Yeah, very much agree. I mean, that said, that's why you see best of breed technologies emerge in every vertical. So whether it's identity, cloud, storage, anything else like teleconferencing or video conferencing, because we moved to video instead of telephone. But there is best of breed, and then those winners in the software space really emerge and tend to own the market for a specific reason, right? It's so much easier to implement, smoother, to implement something like Plaid than it is to build your own connection with a banking platform. So that happens for a reason. That said, I'm going to take the other side of this and say sometimes it's easier to build in-house. Like, there is technology out there too that is very clunky, has a long time to implement, and we found that, having the institutional knowledge is something that was really key to being able to satisfy what we needed to do. So that was one reason we might build in-house. And then second is we really found that we could leverage something like no-code tooling that we already have in-house as software, and use that to build something like much better and much more customizable for our teams. So it really depends scenario to scenario.
And I think there is actually a middle ground here of yes to both in some situations. So internally, we've had a lot of success with our data subject rights platforms, and we built and bought along the same. And by that I mean there's stuff that we could build, and that helped us with a 70% reduction in cost and in time to respond. But there was parts that we couldn't build, and that's where a vendor helps us in that space with a lot of the acceleration that they bring to the table. So it's not always just a clean buy v build conversation when you sit down and look at it. In the plain light of day, sometimes it's a bit of both. What do you have internally that you could do much quicker, much better that helps? Where's the stuff you need the help with? And so for the tech vendors in this space that we're working here, help us to figure that out. And the other part that we kind of briefly touched on earlier but didn't fully get into, there's an aspect to this where plug and play is great, but if you think that we can plug in and play straight away and we're actually getting the full value from the tool, that's a big concern for me. There has to always be customization to be able to get the full management and the full value from any platform. And so that's where some of this hybrid, working closely with the vendors, the professional services aspect, the bringing the folks together, helps to actually get real value from a lot of these tools out there right now.
Really great insight. So we have about 5 minutes left for anyone with questions. Anybody have any questions that they want answered by the panel?
At the beginning, you mentioned that adopting, kind of a discussion that has been happening is the right way to do, rather than, as you said, putting a boundary. This is our privacy sandbox. Others really has. Everybody should spend some of their time doing data privacy. And you don't have to.
I think if you can get it below 3%, that would be, like, I think the problem is that everybody else doesn't want to do data privacy, right? So there's a degree to which you have to try to make it as minimal amount on them as possible, the rest of the company. The thing that also is a concern is you start to push it down to different, as you federate it out, so much of privacy is a judgment call. And how do you make sure that you're making consistent judgment calls across the organization? Your organization has a brand, and a privacy brand that goes with it. So you want everybody to be sort of generally making the same kinds of decisions you would want them to make. So it's a tricky thing to make sure that, I think of it a little bit like you have a prime contractor and then a bunch of subcontractors. So as the privacy office, you want to be that prime contractor, making sure, hey, this is the blueprint of what we're trying to go for. And then you can then kind of federate out like little things. Okay, you're going to go implement this. This is what it looks like to build this house in your space, in your space, in your space. But I think you have to be cautious about, the bigger it gets, right, the more complicated that becomes, and how do you maintain that consistent privacy brand? Because let's be honest, you are your brother's keeper within an organization when it comes to privacy. One team screws up royally, and that could really mess up the rest of the organization in terms of their trust and their brand, because the outside world sees companies and corporations as a monolith. So you can't kind of go to the world and be like, well, see, that was an acquisition and we really hadn't had it under control yet. Like that, you're not going to get that kind of credit from the reputationally. So it's a tricky balance, because you're right, on some level, yeah, everybody needs to do a little bit of privacy, but not everybody wants to. Most people don't. And they think it's not their problem, so you have to convince them that there should be a little bit. So the tools can help reduce that and say, hey, it's not 3% of your time, it's 0.5% of your time, of one of your people's time. It's one sprint, do 2 sprints. And if you can make that as easy as possible, then it definitely helps. But there is this sort of trickiness if you sort of push it out to everybody and say, well, you're all responsible independently of your privacy. They won't be.
I agree. I think obviously it depends on your organization. It depends on how global you are or how local you are, the type of data you have, all of that. There's obviously a big part to unpack as we think through all of that. But the key thing is you want to enable all of your business stakeholders to scale, but you want them to understand what the real red lines are that they can't cross. And so the more that you can help automate the simple decisions, and then understand for them the escalation points and the stuff that really should set off the radars, that really helps all of that. And then, of course, federated data management is a huge opportunity for the privacy space as we think about that data governance aspect as well. So to answer your question in 2 simple words would be, it depends. But it really is kind of a huge opportunity as we think about scaling programs to what can you simplify for everybody, and then where do they need to be attuned to step up.
Yep. We talk about the easy button. Can give people the easy button as much as possible. And then they know if the easy path is to do privacy right, that's the smooth sailing, then they have to make effort to try to screw it up. And so they come talk to you. So if it takes extra effort to sort of want to go outside what your easy path or your well-worn path, whatever it is that you want to describe as the easy path, and then say, okay, well, if you want to go outside that, then come talk to us. It also helps you scale, right? You don't need to be answering every question. The questions are largely answered for people.
Yeah, 100%. We try to come in as that privacy North Star to help guide that decision making. And then the decisions will be different team by team, right? At the end of the day, we're saying this is what you need to do to hit the trust of our customers, of our customers' users, of our internal team, and how that applies is different for each of those different audiences.
think there's another question. Yep.
Nice. Glenn, just a question on, so you mentioned sort of responsibility and applying ultimately, arguing that there is a higher one for best in breed solutions rather than platform play, because our thesis on space, they, privacy is like all. I'm curious to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends. Like, you do see, for example, I don't want to name any tech company names, but you do see like clear winners when it comes to retention and what software is retained in specific verticals, for example. So we tried one type of software and we churned, and basically everybody I've talked to within the industry has churned from that specific software. Well, you see another software and they're really emerging as that winner in that space within the privacy tech stack. So it really depends. An integrated privacy solution is definitely useful as well when it comes to something that is a broader data governance, data usage, data discovery type of feature, because it allows you to do so much and it's so powerful. So I would say it depends. What do y'all think?
I think when it comes to things like within the privacy team workflows, or when the things that you can control that are definitely within the privacy team's remit to own, that's where I've seen success with companies kind of branching out and being like, oh, well, we'll add this module, add that module, add this module, because they're all within the space of, well, yeah, this is the stuff the privacy team specifically needs to do their job day to day. Where it gets trickier is when it starts to, oh, actually, it's not the day-to-day workflow or the research that we need to do, but actually we need to get out into the tech stack proper. We need to put connectors into these different microservices, or we need to deploy something that's more deep in the stack. That's where I find it has been, you need to get more of that buy-in, and the more that you can cover, solve other people's pain points with your tool.
I think, so completely agree. I always, if you're a privacy tech vendor and you're coming into the company, I like to hear from the vendor first, because I might say, look, I can't help you, but this is the team you want to go and talk to. There's nothing more frustrating than somebody selling into another team and they're doing something that's completely against my strategy. That's even more painful. So I would never, for anybody in the vendor space, talk to the CPO. They might tell you, I don't own that, but I can connect you with who would be the right person, because they at least are going to own the data strategy for privacy.
Yeah. They're the influencer if they don't know it. If they aren't the one who owns the money, at least they're the influencers.
And the mavens as well.
Yes.
Again, full Gladwellian. Yeah, they can help you really connect across the organization.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're at time. So some key takeaways. And do each of you have a key takeaway? Oh, we're at time? Or we have one more question? Oh, we have time.
Yeah, hey, Jason Kronk, Institute of Operational Privacy Design. So last time I was in a corporate environment, one of my last parts of the role was to interview HR companies, and we interviewed 3 for a potential solution, not related to privacy, but we were tasked with asking them, like, what are they doing privacy perspective? 2 U.S. companies, nothing. This was right on the eve of GDPR. There was a French company that was like, oh, here's how you do data subject access requests. Here's how you do data deletion, all sorts of things. So my question is, we talked about vendors and in-house. To what degree should our non-privacy suppliers be responsible for including privacy capabilities, or including hooks that can then tie into privacy tech solutions? And then what should we be doing as an industry to support potential interoperability models, such that, if we want to use Big ID or OneTrust for our DCARD, it can plug into any of the solutions we may have.
Yeah, so having been through that journey, that experience as well of, hey, look, we got GDPR coming, how are you going to help me do data subject rights requests? Or Russia localization's happening and you're my HR CRM, how are you helping me think about that? And hearing responses of, well, just get a laptop. Like, those are not solutions for the privacy team. So I think as a vendor, you need to be very aware of what's coming up. And while you may not be a privacy vendor themselves, knowing how you can facilitate your customers to support that journey is everything. And when we think about building and deploying services from my company's perspective, we think about the privacy requirements that our customers may have as part of the deployment of our services for themselves. Every company should be supporting that. So that's the true essence of privacy by design for a non-privacy tool. So that's that. I think the first part of your question there. The second part of the interoperability, obviously that gets competitive because there's some vendors will have overlapping needs, but don't make it prohibitive. I think that would be my request, my call to action. I understand there's always going to be some kind of competition between different vendors, particularly if they do very similar use cases. But help me within the professional services point of view, be able to deploy and interoperate as part of a stack. Don't make it so that I have a take it or leave it solution, because that just leaves me back into the build conversation straight away. That would be my initial reaction. But
yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Right now, you see that because privacy tech is coming in after a lot of these tools have been done, they're doing a great job of being like, we can connect to your Workday or your ADP, or we can connect to all these different vendors you might already have. And kudos to the privacy tech space for recognizing easy one-click connections make it easy to do those integrations. But it would be lovely if the rest of the world of vendors would also be thinking about this stuff up front as well. And I think what very often happens is you start out with a tool that seems great, and then, oh, gee, we didn't think about the fact that we have to do these DSARs, or we didn't think about how we had to do deletion. And yeah, now you don't have your HR tool or your whatever it might be, your CRM doesn't have the easy button for being able to handle these sorts of things. So I think it would be wonderful if there was more awareness of those sorts of issues. I do see it starting to come up, and usually, you have to buy the enterprise version of the software to start getting some of that, those extra bells and whistles. But if there was some sort of standardization of these are the sort of standard ways of being able to execute these things. And so then every tool, you'd say, do you have blah, blah, blah standard? And then boom, the answer is you can interconnect with various tools. And that seems like bigger than anything I can solve. But, that would be the wish list if there was something as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I take I have a slightly contrasting thought process. I think if you're a software company, you have to think about these things now because your customers demand it. Like, who is able to sell nowadays a software tool without a DPA, without some type of promise that your data could be deleted? People want to know about how DSARs are handled within your service, especially as you move up market and want to get those enterprise customers. So you can't offer any tooling without at least thinking about it to some extent and having something in place. There are companies that don't, to Sheila's point as well, and they are just starting to think about it now. But that said, it would be really great if there was an interoperable solution to Jason's point. Like, you really want to have, I want to say an Okta where you could just say, hey, delete my data because I want to turn from these 5 software systems, right? Or delete my data or pull all my data about my users from these 10 systems. So there are interoperable solutions that could come up in the future that really handle this in a clean way that we don't have now at market.
I think the other call to action I'd have for people who sit in our own seat, we talk a lot about privacy by design, and we often think about it from an SDLC perspective, but there's a whole other aspect of software development that we've also got to think about as well. So it's how you build the tool that you're going to sell, but it's how you also run your program. It's how you also think about your own data lifecycle management across all of that. And so when you're having these initial conversations with a vendor to say, that's cool, you got all of these things turned on, but what am I actually going to do internally once I've actually deployed it? That's a whole nother lifecycle management that you also need to think about and forecast if there's going to be any potential interoperability issues going forwards.
Yeah, definitely. So Any other questions, or else I'm going to move to, it looks like we have one more.
How do I? Usually I'm talking to the engineering teams. The open source is like anything else when teams are considering open source, right? I'll let the IP team figure out whether it's okay to use it and whether it creates any other sorts of issues. Often, though, in the privacy space, open source can be a good option because you're not trying to sell the thing. It's something for use internally, so often you get a little bit more of a leeway with your IP team because you're building on the open source. I fully am like, hey, go look at it like anything else. If it can help us get there faster, I don't think of it as any different than, hey, we need to build a thing within the company. Hey, there's an open source thing that could help us do what we're looking for. Let's go for it. So I honestly don't know that I think about it a whole lot different. Usually just comes up in the context of, oh, we're going to build it. Okay, well then, is there something open source that we can get the leg up on, get started?
I think the open source community as well has a huge opportunity. If we think about decentralized identity management, a lot of the work in that space right now is heavily in open source. And that's a potential game changer for as we're thinking about really more privacy enhancing solutions internally. So there's the embracing of the open source community where we can start to innovate if you have the engineering resources internally to really help you get there.
Yeah, I mean, agree with what both of them said. It doesn't matter if something is open source. What matters is it actually going to help us? I think the only thing in the open source question is really what license is it under, right? Is it a permissible license? Is that something that risk level in terms of that license that we're willing to embrace? And then how will it be implemented, right? Internal solutions, to Sheila's point, have different risks associated with external ones. So that implementation question is, and the type of data it might be touching is going to be a question as well to really understand around that OS tooling.
The great thing is that you see a lot of companies, because it isn't their core space, they do this in security too. You'll see a fair number of companies being like, hey, we're going to open source a thing that we built for ourselves internally just for the good of the community. So I love that continues to happen. And so, all for it. Please do more of that.
Yeah, OS is great. So we're almost at time. Any key takeaways each of you have?
I think the key takeaways, because this is one of my core pain points, is helping understand what foundational things need to be in place. What kind of level of maturity does the organization's data systems need to be in order to use a tool, and also the support on the implementation, because that can be a huge pain point. Great, I have a tool, but I still don't have the headcount to implement it. Can be a common concern.
For me, it's really two. One, from those of us who sit in the privacy hot seat internally, embrace this space, have those rapid conversations with tech and vendors, and really bring in the IT team for that conversation. For those who are bringing solutions to us, keep bringing these innovative thought patterns forward. Right now the economy's tough, but we want to hear these solutions. For example, Sanjay and I had a great conversation earlier about some of the work that he's doing in the risk management space, and new areas where we can truly innovate together as we're thinking about how we can better serve our own organization with some of the tooling out there. So thank you for all the great ideas, and please keep reaching out and engaging with us in this space.
Yeah, agree with what both of them said. I mean, a key takeaway is really engage with your core buyers, really understand what they're looking for, and if you build something great, they will come. So I really love that everybody in this group is interested in privacy tech innovation, and I think it's only going to grow from here. So we have breakout roundtables after this. I believe if you look at the back of your badge, it might have details in terms of your breakout assignment. So feel free to take a look at that and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.